If people are joining who don't know me, I can see a lot of my landlord faces here, which is amazing. But if you don't know me, my name is Venessa Ofonja, and I'm the owner director of VA Property Sales and Lettings in Luton, where we love to manage your properties and find you tenants and make sure that we look after your landlord interest. Just as we're getting warmed up and we're waiting for people to join us in the next 2-3 minutes, obviously tonight's all about the Renters' Rights Bill that's set to come in pretty soon. Can I get by way of chat in terms of what we feel we know as landlords, or how confident we feel we are with this Renters' Rights Bill that's coming through? Can I get a little 1 to 10 in the message box in terms of how you're feeling about this Renters' Rights Bill? So if you feel really confused, don't know much, not sure what it's all about, you've just heard the title, you're going to be towards the end of 1. If you're feeling super confident, you've been following the news, you've been following the legislation, you think you know what the Renters' Rights Bill is going to bring to the table, you're going to be more towards a scale of 10. So on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your confidence level in terms of what you think you know and how this is going to change our lives as landlords when the Renters' Rights Bill is passed? So from 1 to 10, so I'm seeing 1s, I'm seeing some 2s and 3s. I'm seeing a 7. We have a landlord who's feeling very, very confident about the Renters' Rights Bill, which is great, because if you're able to follow the news, read up on the legislation, what's coming through, what's been changed, what's been amended, then you may be feeling confident, which is a great place to be. But don't worry if you're at a 1 or if you're at a 3, because to be honest, a lot of us are in that space. We're still trying to navigate it. To be honest, even us as agents, we're still trying to navigate it. I'm constantly reading, I'm constantly Googling, I'm constantly talking to industry professionals. So being at a 1 is totally fine. Being at a 10, you need to come and join the live and be a speaker with me, because there's lots going on and it's constantly changing. I don't know if you were aware that yesterday is it in the Commons? I think it's in Parliament. It was House of Lords. Thank you, Dawn. In the House of Lords yesterday, the bill was brought to the House of Lords to be debated. There was a number of amendments that we were pushing. We were hoping that the government would take into consideration to amend. Unfortunately, we'll go through this later, but unfortunately, those amendments were not taken into consideration. So we're sort of back to what the original bill is set to be. So it's constantly changing up until just yesterday. So our compliance queen is going to bring a lot of this information to you this evening when she joins the call, and she's ready to talk to us. But like I said, this is a huge change to the private rental sector. In fact, I think the biggest or the most significant change since the Housing Act of 1988. So we're talking over 35 years. I don't think I've been a landlord for that long. I might be giving away my age a little bit, but I haven't been a landlord for that long. But for those of us who have or haven't, this is going to change the face of how we conduct our tenancy rental business, which is super duper important. You know, the rental market is still a great market to be in. The sector is still thriving. Yes, there's challenges, but it's still thriving. So we need to know as landlords, as investors, how we're going to navigate the next phase. And now it is actually 7:35. So I'm going to start this evening off and people will join as we go along, which is perfectly fine. But thank you for dropping your confidence numbers in the chats. We were everywhere from number 1 all the way through to number 7 in terms of how confident we're feeling as landlords on a scale of 1 to 10. So we'll kick off now at 7:30, and we hope that the others will quickly join along. So again, just to introduce myself, Venessa Ofonja from VA Properties, based in Luton, where I started the business in 2008-9, and it's grown nice and steadily over the years to a lovely team of property professionals who look after landlord properties, whether that's property management, whether that's sourcing new tenants, and also whether now selling for landlords. We're actually doing a lot more landlord sales, which I'll touch on later, than ever before. Clearly, that's instigated as well by the Renters' Rights Bill. So VA Properties do everything from the finding to the managing to the refurbishing to now the selling. So that's who we are as an agency, if you don't know who we are. Quick lettings update before we move into our main session of the evening. And I'm so excited to bring tonight's guest speaker to you, but a quick market update on the letting side of things. So the lettings market at the moment, we're finding an interesting space. Like I said, it's still thriving. We're still finding that supply is not enough for the demand. However, what we are seeing as agents and as landlords is the rental, what I call the rental X premium, that properties were attracting potentially 6-12 months ago, where properties were going for very, very, very high rental figures. That is slightly starting to cool down. And we have seen that, what I call X, cooling down in pretty much the best part of the last 6-9 months of this year, since the spring, where properties would normally go for a slightly exaggerated premium. That's kind of not there anymore. It doesn't mean that the rents are falling, because rents are still at an all-time high. But I think what we're seeing is the slightly X premium moving away. And that's for a number of reasons, particularly around tenant affordability. We're seeing tenant affordability really challenged these days, because where rents have risen so high, the cost of living, all the things that we know, tenants are really being challenged in their pocket to afford these rents. So tenants are now coming together as sometimes 2 families plus a brother to rent a house, so that the affordability pot in the house can be much higher to afford the rent and the bill. In fact, I was reading some statistics by a company called Good Lord yesterday, who are a massive referencing platform company. They deal with hundreds of agents, thousands of tenants, and they actually said that there's something called renters poverty at the moment, which means basically over 40% more than half of renters at the moment are spending more than 40% of their gross income on rent. And that for me is huge, because when you think about all the rest of the bills that we have to take care of, from the council tax to the utilities, etc., not to even talk about our lifestyle and the pleasures that we want, to have 40% of your gross income on your actual rent is massive. So that's what's bringing the challenge to affordability. And that's where I think we're seeing that slightly X premium on rent starting to cool, because tenants are struggling to meet all the numbers and make it work. And the last thing that we want as landlords is our rents not to be paid. And linked to that, we're also seeing, unfortunately, more tenancies, more tenants this year, unfortunately, fallen into arrears. A lot of that is due to the challenges in affordability. And again, unfortunately, one step further, needing to go to the courts for evictions. So again, as landlords, we're having to be, not that we're not careful when we're selecting tenants, because we always have been, but even more careful these days when we're searching and selecting for new tenants, because nobody wants to be in that situation. I mean, a tenant genuinely doesn't want to be in that situation either, but we're finding that the referencing side of things now, the game is really, really stepping up, where tenants are finding affordability a struggle. We're finding quite a few tenants that put themselves forward with the best interest are actually failing some of the reference checks because they weren't aware they had ECJs on their file, or something about their reference profile unfortunately doesn't tick all the green boxes, and they're failing to meet the reference criteria for properties. And particularly linked to that, more and more landlords are protecting themselves with rent guarantee insurance. And in order for you to get rent guarantee that will pay out if your tenant doesn't pay, your tenant literally has to tick every single green reference box possible for you to be able to have that insurance. And again, we'll talk about that more later, but we're seeing that is the trend in terms of where renting and referencing and rent premiums are going at the moment. So you have to be careful as landlords not to over X price your rent in this particular period, particularly if your property is empty. You do not want it to sit empty for any longer than it should be. A property should be on and off the market within a couple of weeks if it's priced correctly, advertised correctly, and of course presented correctly. So those are the things that we're seeing coming through on the rental market trends. But like I said, overall, it's still a fantastic space to be in. We're still busy renting properties, every single day, every single week, but the challenges are there. And where we do have landlords where their properties have been sitting on the market for 3-4 weeks or longer, we are having to honestly and openly look at the pricing, look at the strategy, look at if there's any issues with that property for the landlord to address in order to get that property off the market, because there are challenges out there. So that's just a very brief overview of the lettings market at the moment and some of the things that we're experiencing through renting properties at VA. And I believe it's very similar for agencies up and down the country. Now, moving on to the next part, which is actually our main part of the evening, where we want to talk to you about the Renters' Rights Bill that's set to come through very, very soon. And I have a really amazing special guest who's going to be our speaker. Dawn is going to tell us all about the Renters' Rights Bill. And just permit me for a moment before I bring her on to read her professional profile, because I think it's important for everyone to know why Dawn is sitting in front of us and discussing this topic with us this evening. So let me go ahead. So Dawn is a trusted expert in the lettings legislation and operational compliance, helping landlords stay protected, profitable, and fully up to date with the ever-changing legal landscape of property letting. With over 20 years of hands-on experience, Dawn has worked across every level of the lettings industry, from frontline negotiator to branch manager, to now leading large-scale tenancy management operations for landlords and agents across the UK. Her deep knowledge of the lettings law, combined with real-world experience, means she offers practical, clear guidance that keeps landlords safe and their investments secure. Dawn currently leads a full tenancy and compliance management service, overseeing thousands of tenancies and ensuring legal best practice for move in to move out. Dawn also delivers landlord-focused compliance training, advisory support, and legal update sessions designed to give landlords peace of mind and confidence in their responsibilities. If you're a landlord and you're looking to stay compliant, avoid costly mistakes, and make sure that your properties managed to the highest level, Dawn is the expert that you need in your corner. I've personally known Dawn probably for 6 years or so now. And when it comes to compliance, she's my go-to. Even if I have a problem, if I'm not particularly sure of something, I will jump online and I will message Dawn, because if anyone knows about compliance and lettings, it's this lady. So I'm really pleased to bring her on board. So Dawn, without further ado, I welcome you to the platform.
Thank you for having me here, and really interesting to hear how the market's going down there in Luton, and also really interesting to see how there's a different level of knowledge with the landlords that are out there. And this is what I've been finding over the past 5 years. I've been talking about the Renters' Rights Bill, so I'm not surprised that landlords are confused, because it's changed names during that time. We've changed government during that time. It's changed its path multiple times. But I do think that we are now very, very nearly there, and this is probably going to be law next year. So thank you for inviting me here, and I'm happy to come and talk to you this evening.
Fabulous. Well, we're going to get started, and I think the best way for us to approach this subject, Dawn, is I'm actually going to play the place of a landlord-ish this evening, because I know we have some confident landlords out there, but in general, most landlords are not that confident, are not that sure what this Renters' Rights Bill is going to be bringing to the table for us as landlords. So I'm going to be that landlord in a way this evening, just asking you questions, going through scenarios with you, picking your brains really as a landlord to find out how the Renters' Rights Bill is going to change my business as a landlord. Landlords out there, please, we do welcome your questions and your input. So at any point in time, please drop any questions, any thoughts, any concerns that you might have that you would like either myself or Dawn to address. We're going to leave 15 minutes at the end to do a Q&A. This part of the meeting will probably last about 30 to 40 minutes, leaving 10 to 15 minutes for a Q&A. And we aim to wrap up the meeting around about 8:35, 8:40, we should be done. So grab your teas, grab your coffees. And also another thing that we have for you this evening is, if you look in the chat box, we're going to drop a link there now and as we go through the evening for a free landlord health check. So if you've got a property, and it could be anywhere, and you're not sure about certain things at the moment within that property or within the tenancy that you have, if you complete the link, it literally takes you 2-3 minutes. There's a couple of questions on there that will trigger a call from myself or one of my team, where we'll happily sit through and go through your tenancy concerns or questions that you've highlighted in the landlord health check link that we'll drop in the chat. So please feel free to use that at any point, and we'll also send it out after the meeting. So, renters' rights bill. What does this mean? In fact, just to kick off, I actually had a real life situation today. I was sharing with Dawn earlier, where in the office today, I was one of my landlords literally came running into the office this afternoon, and she was in such a state of a panic, and she was like, Vanessa, you need to help me. I'm so confused. And instantly I thought there was something wrong with her property, something had happened. And when she sat down, I said, what's the matter? And she literally said, the renters' rights, I don't understand. Do I have to do something now? Is it tomorrow? When is it? And she was so confused. And, you know, it was a real hard reality for me to see, because here's a lady who's been a landlord for probably well over 30-40 years. She's a very mature, experienced landlord, but the thought of this literally scared her, that she ran into VA to sit down and ask me a number of questions. And I feel that her doing that is probably no different to how a lot of us landlords are thinking and feeling in our head. It's just that she was local and she literally just jumped into my chair. So I think something tonight that we want to do is try and put some of those nerves and concerns a little bit at bay, because the landlord space, as we've said, is still a great space. So Dawn, please, as a landlord, I'm confused. I don't really know what's going on. All I'm hearing is they're going to stop the Section 21 notices. So I'm thinking, if I want my property back, particularly if I have a tenant who's not paying or a bad behaving tenant, how do I get my property back? So can you please tell and share with us, what are some of the main bills that are coming through on this renters' rights?
Well, it is, as you said at the beginning of this presentation today, that it is the biggest legislative change that we have faced in the last 35 years. The introduction of the Housing Act in 1988, for those landlords that are old enough to have been in the market that long, would have welcomed that change in legislation, because it was a positive, because it took us out of the protected tenancy that we knew back then. Thankfully, I was only 8 at the time, so I didn't have to learn that legislation. But this is the biggest legislative change in the past 35 years. And unfortunately, in many ways, it feels like we're going backwards. There were some revisions made to the Housing Act in 1997 that actually improved the sector for landlords. But now it does feel a little bit like we're going backwards, because there are a lot of restrictions placed on landlords in terms of obtaining possession of their property. So the abolishment of Section 21. There's going to be no fixed term anymore with the Renters' Rights Bill. So gone are your 6, 12, 9-month tenancies. They will be periodic with immediate effect.
So what does that mean? So if I can interject on, what does that mean? Because I don't really understand that. So for all the time that we've been renting as landlords, there's always been a fixed term tenancy. So if this bill is proposing the end of fixed terms, what does that mean for me? Does that mean that a tenant could move in on day 1 and move out on day 31, or can I pull my property back on day 60? What does that mean where the government are saying no more fixed terms? Can you explain that to us in a bit more detail?
Absolutely. So ultimately, every tenancy that is entered into is going to be an immediate month-by-month periodic tenancy. So gone is the 6-month period of the tenant being tied in for that term. So a tenant will start a tenancy on a month-by-month periodic basis, and the tenant can terminate that tenancy at any time, but needs to provide the landlord with a 2-month notice period. Right. So there will be a notice period drawn into statute law. But what that does mean for landlords is effectively a tenant can move in on day 1 and give notice on day 2 to leave in 2 months. So for landlords, what that essentially means is that it could increase the turnover of tenants and the amount of times that they need to find a tenant within a 12-month period. But I'm always the optimist, and I always like to look at the positives. And whilst this could be a challenge for some people, I think we have to look at the facts here that most tenants are staying in situ in a tenancy for anywhere between 3 and 4 years. Tenants as a whole do not want to move into properties and then move again in 2 months. It's not what they want to do. And the reason that the government brought this in was because what they wanted to do was give flexibility for tenants to exit properties whereby landlords were not doing what they should be. So, for example, poor quality housing. They wanted to give the tenants the route and the option to leave should the property not be fit to standard. So as a whole, I don't think this is going to cause a major problem within the industry. Some of the things to consider in particular is if you have furnished properties, because that would make it easier for tenants to move in and out. I talk to agents all over the country. As you know, I manage properties all up and down the country. In some of the holiday areas may pose some problems. I've got a lovely agent down in Cornwall. You know, a little 2-month tenancy will surely be cheaper than a 2-week holiday rental. So there's things to consider, but as a whole for our industry, I don't think the periodic tenancy is going to pose any problems. Just in answer to your question as well there, though, Venessa, unfortunately, this is called the Renters' Rights Bill. Now, if we look at the definition of renter, that is a tenant. So if you label it as the lovely Labour have now renamed it the Renters' Rights, ultimately we're saying it's the Tenants' Rights Bill. And therefore a landlord, of course, does not have that same opportunity to serve notice on a tenant that the tenant has to serve on the landlord.
That was my next question. I was going to ask you that, because I was thinking, well, is it 50-50? So
no.
On the landlord side of things, what does that mean for us? So because it would be actually to our advantage if we had a bad tenant, a misbehaving tenant, a non-paying tenant, to be able to also exercise a break in tenancy as soon as we see that. So what does that mean for us? If we're not going to be on a periodic term, then what does that mean for us as landlords?
So as landlords, there's a lot to consider here, and it kind of takes us into the realms of talking about the fact that we are losing Section 21, which I know, having talked to probably thousands of landlords and agents over the last few years, that is the biggest concern of landlords, that they will not be able to get possession of their property. But the question that I always ask when talking about Section 21 is, if you're a landlord that serves Section 21, what was your reason? And the same answers come back, and it is because I want to sell, because I wanted to move back in, because my tenant was in arrears, or because the tenant was not a desirable tenant. They were in breach of tenancy, maybe not looking after the property. And ultimately, in the new world, we are still going to be able to gain possession for all of those reasons. Never in my 23 years, I think I've been in the industry now, never have I known a landlord serve Section 21 for no reason. There's always a reason. They don't just evict good tenants for no reason. The problem, and not the problem, let's call it a challenge. The challenge that we face under the new rules is that, for example, in that periodic tenancy that I was talking about, whereby a tenant can give notice on day 2, if a landlord wishes to sell the property, or if the landlord wishes to move back into the property, then the landlord needs to be aware that they are actually restricted on doing that for the first 12 months of that tenancy, despite it being periodic. So you're actually not in a position to be able to serve a notice citing a ground that you wish to sell or move back in until, we believe it will be until 8 months have passed of the initial tenancy. And then the notice period that will need to be given to the tenant is actually double what the Section 21 notice is now, and it will be a 4-month period. So what landlords now need to consider is, if they are entering into a tenancy with a tenant, that should that tenant do everything that they should do in line with the tenancy agreement, then they cannot get that tenant out or ask them to leave for a period of 12 months in order to allow them to sell. But there's a couple of things, again, I always like to look on the side of optimism, and it doesn't stop landlords selling properties with tenants in situ. So if it's an investment property and it meets affordability to sell it as an investment property, there's no restrictions there. But one of the things that I will say is if a landlord uses either of these grounds, so either wants to move back into the property or wants to sell the property, if they are unsuccessful in selling the property, they're actually not legally allowed to rent that property out for 12 months, which was one of the amendments that was rejected today, that we were fingers crossed. I was like literally hoping, yes, please, 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 that was going to be reduced to 6 months. But unfortunately, as you said at the beginning, it was rejected. So these are things that landlords need to consider in their long-term intentions of being a landlord.
So it sounds to me from my point of view as a landlord, it sounds like we as landlords, we are actually in fixed term contracts, but the tenants are in rolling contracts. That's the long and short of it, I think. So we're tied in, but they're not.
Yeah. So what you're doing there is you're talking sense, which quite often the government don't do.
Okay. So
it's a periodic tenancy for tenants, not landlords.
Okay. I mean, like you said, though, I think on the positive side of things, landlords, like you said, generally do not give notice to their tenants unless it's for a genuine reason, which you cited earlier. So I don't think that's the biggest, scariest thing for us to worry about. But then moving on to something that's a little bit more concerning for us as landlords is about our rents. And in terms of how we can increase our rents or review our rents. Now, the Renters' Rights Bill, again, is set to change how landlords can do this. So can you share or explain to us in more detail how increasing and reviewing our rents may change with the bill?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I do that, I just think it's important to just talk about very quickly the ability to evict a tenant on the basis of rent arrears before we talk about that rent increase section. Because landlords can still evict tenants on rent arrears grounds. The grounds will still be present, but there has been some significant changes in relation to how we will be able to gain possession of somebody that's in rent arrears. And one of the things I think landlords really need to digest, understand, and protect themselves and their interests in light of the changes. So, for example, at the moment, if a tenant is 2 months in rent arrears, we can serve a Section 8 notice citing a mandatory ground. What that means is if we get to court and we're able to prove the mandatory ground, the judge has to give us possession. It's not discretionary. It's not his decision. He has to, by law, give us possession. The period of arrears is being extended from 2 months in arrears to 3 months in arrears. So we're having an additional month added to that process. Now, in current time, if you serve that Section 8 notice after the 2 months of arrears, you have to give the tenant 14 days to make a payment. And should they fail to make the payment, you can then make an application to court. Well, that 14-day period is also being extended to 28 days, so a 4-week period. So in theory, we've gone from 2.5 months to 4 months before we can take any court action. So we're talking about six weeks additional time that you as a landlord could have a non-paying tenant. Now, with Section 21 notice, some people may know, some people may not, that when you serve a Section 21, unless the tenant defends the notice, the court will make a decision through the post. It's called accelerated possession. There's no need to attend court. With Section 21 abolished, every eviction case for every ground that is going to be introduced will need to be heard in a court. And this, again, was one of the concerns, particularly when Conservatives were in power, that they promised us that court reform would happen before abolishment of Section 21. Well, of course, that hasn't happened, and they're proceeding without court reform. So with what landlords again need to consider is the fact that currently it probably can take anywhere up to 10 months to evict a tenant from the point of first arrears to eviction of possession. You know, if you've got to go through the court, the possession order, the bailiffs, whereas now that could extend even further because the backlog of court cases now that everything has to be heard there. So one of the biggest tips that I'm giving to landlords at the moment is protect your rent. protect your revenue, protect your rent guarantee insurance is available. It will not only pay you your rent when the tenant fails to pay, it will cover your court cost, your bailiff cost, your solicitor's fees, and it basically will mitigate your risk. So I just wanted to point that out first.
I totally agree. If I jump in there, and that it goes back to what I said earlier during the lettings update, that now than any time before, we're putting up probably 7 in 10 of our new lets, the landlords are requesting and taking up the rent guarantee insurance, because of the things that we're talking about tonight. And also that has a direct relation to the referencing criteria that a tenant has to pass in order for a landlord to actually get this rent guarantee insurance. So what then that means, it's like a domino. So then what that means is the caliber of tenant that we're looking for, or that we need in our properties, goes up a notch, because in order for you as landlords and for us as landlords to get that insurance, the tenants have to have a fully clean credit history. They cannot have any CCJs, even if it's £500. They have to have a clear credit score. They have to have good backing in terms of their employment income. They have to meet the 2.5 times the rent affordability. Before there was, there were gives where they could fall short a little bit. If you're looking for the rent guarantee insurance, the 2.5 times the rent in terms of how much the tenant earns, or the household, I should say, in that property, they have to meet it for you to get the rent insurance. Their landlord references have to be clean. So these are the things now, I think, as landlords, we need to fully understand, fully embrace, because to protect our revenue income, that is the type of tenant that we need.
Well, also because one of the things that we've not talked about is the fact that they're also putting a ban on taking rent in advance above 1 month. So sometimes in the past you will have international tenants that don't have a credit history and are unable to be referenced. You may have people that don't meet the referencing criteria, but they're in a position where they can offer you 6 months rent in advance. Even that now is not going to be an option. What they're actually saying is, unless the tenant offers, but you've got to be very careful that you haven't convinced them that that's the only way they get the tenancy. So we have now, as landlords, we've got to be very, very selective with the tenants that we choose, to ensure that, one, we can protect our own interests, and two, that they're going to be good tenants.
Wow, I mean, I think the stopping of the advance payment of rent is a crazy one, because, like you said, that allowed so many more tenants into properties, and ultimately the government need people in homes. So that being taken away is just doesn't make any sense. So it really doesn't. So I think that looking at the tenants that we need to procure these days is going to, for us as agents as well, it's going to become more tricky.
It is, absolutely.
So,
and then
sorry,
rent increases. Did you want me to talk about the rent increases?
Yeah, I wanted you to touch on rent increases, because again, obviously with the cost of everything going up in terms of what it costs us as landlords to run our properties, to run our landlord business, the only way we can recoup some of that cost usually is via our rent increases. Fairly done. So can you explain to us again what the bill is proposing around rent increasing?
Yeah, absolutely. And this was, as I said at the beginning, landlords feared loss of Section 21. I fear this much more, because it's putting a control on the way that landlords are able to increase their rent. So I'm going to talk you very briefly through what it will look like when renters' rights arrives in our sector. So first and foremost, gone are the tenancy review clauses that automatically increase rent on an upward basis. They are no longer valid. They will not be able to be entered into the tenancy agreement. Now, most rent increases as an agent, as self-managing landlords, are normally done through negotiation. A conversation with the tenant, realistic rent increase, both parties agree, here we go, happy days. We're not going to be able to do that anymore. We're going to the only way that we're going to be able to increase rent is by way of what's called a Section 13 notice. Section 13 notices exist today and are used whereby tenants don't necessarily agree to a rent increase and you wish to enforce one. But what the problem is with the new way of doing things is, firstly, the notice period has been extended again. So that's now a 2-month notice period rather than a 1 month. The landlord can only increase the rent once every 12 months, which is the norm now anyway. But the concerning thing for me is that should the tenant feel that the rent increase is unfair, they can take it to what's called the first tier tribunal. Now, they can do that now if they want to, but if the first tier tribunal currently decide that actually it is a fair market rent and that the tenant should pay it, in the current scenario that where we're sitting today, that rent increase will be backdated to the initial rent increase date and the tenant has to pay that increase. Under new legislation, the rent increase won't actually kick in until the tribunal determination date, which could be 4 to 6 months down the line. And if we're waiting 4 to 6 months, what that then means is we can only increase the rent again in another 12 months. We've actually had 18 months pass in terms of an increase on rent. And what it will mean is that tenants can use it as a delay. Rather than a genuine, I think this is above market value, they're going to use it as a delay tactic. It's going to kick the can down the road, so that although the increase was supposed to start in November, actually, if I go to the first tier tribunal, I won't have to pay that for a 6-month period. So 2 things I want to say here is, firstly, relationships with the tenants. This is where agents and landlords, if self-managing, need to make sure that they have good relationships with the tenants and that the tenants understand why a landlord is imposing the rent increase and that the rent increase being imposed is within market value. Now, most landlords, if they've got a good tenant in situ, will leave it slightly below market value as an incentive for those tenants to stay. But what I'm suggesting is that when we're doing rent increases now, along with the Section 13, we're providing best price guides to show these tenants that actually the rent that we're taking you to is a fair rent. We've done all that we can to show that the landlord isn't being greedy, he's just taking it to the right level. So I think landlords right here and right now need to be reviewing their rents. They need to be looking at, as I said, 23 years I've been in this industry, and although the government make out that landlords are horrible, landlords are nasty people and they're all about the money, I still have so many landlords that I look after properties for that just quite simply won't increase their rent, and they're hundreds of pounds below market value. But what I now have to say to these landlords is 2 things. Firstly, Mr. Landlord, if you look to sell the property with the tenant in and your property and your rent's not at market value, it's going to affect the value of your house for sale. And secondly, you may not have the benefit of being able to increase rent as we have over the course of the last 30 years in the same way that you're used to. So now's the time to do that review and look at moving your rents up in an upward trend. Definitely.
And I think, Dawn, related to that in terms of, so we talked about Section 21 being abolished. So landlords are then left thinking, okay, so if I can't use a Section 21, I can't easily increase my rent, but I need my property back to sell it or to move in. Under what grounds then, as a landlord, will we be able to obtain our properties back? Is the Section 8 still going to exist? If it is, what would it look like? Are they going to insert more grounds for possession? What is going to be the way forward if we need to maneuver?
So currently the Section 8 has 17 grounds for possession, and I have reviewed the proposed new grounds, excuse me, which I think at last count totaled around 32. Because there's a lot of sub-grounds in there. And if we actually look at the renters' rights for the purpose of the way that they were trying to design it, it was to give tenants powers of enforcement or a route to leave if they had a bad landlord. On the flip side, what it was also intended to do was enable a good landlord to get rid of a bad tenant in a much speedier method. Now, one of the positives that I see coming into the grounds for possession is a mandatory antisocial behaviour ground. Because at the moment, we only have a discretionary antisocial behaviour ground, which is ground 14. And what that means is if you take a case to the judge will make a decision based on your evidence that you've presented as to whether or not he thinks you are entitled to possession. Now, I'm going to be truthful. I've never known a judge award on discretionary grounds because they don't want to evict people. You struggle to get possession on mandatory grounds sometimes.
Yeah.
So there are some good grounds that are coming in there that will be able to help landlords evict antisocial behaviour, criminal activity, those sort of things. But in answer to your question, yes, they are extending the grounds quite heavily. Once this has all been finalised, of course, we'll scrutinise the grounds in more detail. But yes, they are extending them, but it will be under a Section 8 notice with new grounds.
Okay. That's there's a lot of positivity there, I think. So that is a good thing for us as landlords. Now, moving on to the subject of pets, because pets is something that I've heard a lot about within this renters' rights bill, where the government are talking about, because at the moment as a landlord, you can say yay or nay to having pets in your properties. It's a personal choice. So where are we going with this renters' rights bill and pets? Because I have no issue with pets, but a lot of times landlords do not want pets in their properties. Maybe where they've had bad experiences in the past, where they've allowed a pet in, with the openness of, okay, that's fine. And unfortunately, the property hasn't been looked after the best as a result of the pet, maybe with the way the pet has been kept or trained or whatever those circumstances might have been. So then they then said, right, going forward, I'm a no pet property landlord. What is the government saying in this new bill about pets in lets?
Okay, so this is the frustrating one for me because I don't think they've considered a variety of factors here. We have to remember that they introduced something in 2019 called the tenant fee ban that actually put a restriction on the amount of deposit a landlord can take. So we're capped at 5 weeks. So in a nutshell, the Renters' Rights Bill is saying that landlords are no longer able to blanket ban pets. So an advertisement with no pets allowed would be deemed illegal. And landlords must only decline pets on the basis of reasonable reasons. Now, this is where, again, the government make me laugh somewhat, because what's reasonable to me might not necessarily be reasonable to you, Venessa. It's a subjective word that could be misinterpreted in many different ways. They have been clear on a few things. So, for example, if the property is in a purpose-built block of flats where you've got a freeholder and a block management company and the rules state, the superior lease states no pets, then it's no pets. That can't be overridden. In HMOs, I think it would be reasonable to decline a pet in a HMO. If you've got a 6-bed HMO and everybody wants a dog, we've got a problem. If you've got somebody that wants to rent a 1-bedroom property from you and they want to move in with a husky, you've again got a problem because size is an issue. The pet doesn't suit the accommodation. Other things that you can look at are things like outdoor space, particularly if they're pets like dogs. But we have to, widen the scope, because if somebody wants a goldfish, I don't see on any grounds there'll be a reason for declining a goldfish. And likewise, in particular, so if you had a rather small property but somebody wanted a chihuahua, you couldn't really use the size and element thing. So what they have said is, I don't have all the answers. I hope that they're going to give us some guidance so that landlords and us as agents do not fall foul of the legislation as to what is a reasonable reason to decline. So we'll have to keep our eyes peeled. Again, another amendment that was being looked at was that we could actually take an additional 3 weeks deposit for a pet. But again, the government have said no. So we're stuck at 5 weeks. What they have said, though, as a glimmer of hope, I'm looking at it as a glimmer of hope, is that they may review the tenant fee ban and make an amendment to that part of the ban in terms of the deposit amount. But they're going to want this through first before they even consider looking at that. So even if they do, I think it'll be a year or two down the line.
And there's also been talks about some sort of landlord property, some sort of landlord database, some sort of landlord redress scheme. And this is quite concerning to us as landlords, because already we have to comply with so many other pieces of legislation, which is the way it is, and that's fine. So what is this landlord database that the government are proposing within this renters' rights bill? Does it mean that every landlord in the country will have their name on a public register somewhere that says who they are, their property details, their home address? I mean, well, what's this about? And I guess what's the objective behind having a landlord ombudsman, and then how's it going to be used? I mean, will we be able to use it as landlords? Will we be able to take our tenant cases to the ombudsman? Will tenants have to register themselves somewhere? So can you explain a little bit about the landlord requirements here?
Yeah, so I'll talk about the database first and then the ombudsman separate. So database, we don't quite know what's going to be out there in the public domain, if anything at all. We're unsure at the moment what's going to be publicly available. I do feel that there will be some certain things that will be publicly available. And if we just look at Wales for a moment, Wales have something called Rent Smart Wales, and as part of Rent Smart Wales, every landlord and every rental property in the private rented sector has to be listed on a database. This is where they're going with the database thing for landlords in England. Now, I don't think it's going to be a huge problem. One of the things that concerns me is it is another additional cost for landlords, and that is one of the challenges. They have said that it is going to be a small fee, but landlords will have to register, and failure to register has quite hefty penalties. One of which being a rent repayment order, that the tenant can make an application to have their rent paid back to them should a landlord fail to be registered on the database. So we are going to have to comply. And in answer to your question, why do I think they're doing this? Well, it's quite simple. It enables the government and the local authorities to see every private rented sector property in the UK if everybody complies. That will help them with taxation, that will help them with legislation, it will help them with deposit register, it will help them with a variety of things. It's control. It makes every property that's in the private rented sector, if a landlord is compliant, visible. So that's the database side of things. Now, the ombudsman side of things, I have to say that there's part of me that agrees with the ombudsman, and I say this with my agent hat on and not my landlord hat, okay? Because at the moment, as a letting agent, we too have a lot of legal requirements that we have to meet. So we have to have client money protection, we have to be trained, we have to be a member of a redress scheme. We have a lot that we too need to comply with, which is absolutely fine, because as the experts, I feel that we should. But what happens at the moment is, if you as a managing agent, if you have a disgruntled tenant that wants to raise a complaint about whatever the case may be, that complaint can only be raised against the agent. But in a lot of occasions that actually our hands are tied, because we don't have the authority to do what it is that we need to do without the say-so of the landlord, but yet we become accountable. So for me, it is only right that the landlord has some accountability for their actions as a landlord. And twofold here. So if you're using a managing agent, if it is the agent's fault, the tenant can go and complain to the agent redress scheme, and the agent would be ordered to pay compensation or rectify the problem. If it's the landlord that's holding that up, then the tenant has the right to go to the landlord ombudsman and seek the same redress. One other key factor is that any tenants that are living in self-managed properties, which is where a lot of the problems stem from, because there's a lot of inexperienced landlords that are out there self-managing. At the moment, they have nowhere to go for redress other than the environmental health. They will now have a right to redress under the property ombudsman. But again, unfortunately for a landlord, it is going to come at a cost. Now, I'm hoping that for landlords out there, that cost is, I am a landlord, charge me one fee.
Yeah.
Not I am a landlord with 100 properties, charge me 100 fees.
Yeah.
So I'm watching that very carefully in terms of, because I am very mindful that costs are being levied on landlords. And you know, it's not easy out there. So yeah, those are the two things that are coming our way as well.
What do we say? I mean, I guess we're bracing ourselves. Just as a quick reminder, everybody, and thank you for joining the live. If you have any questions or any concerns, we're soon moving into the Q&A part of the evening before we close. Please drop your questions in the chat and we'll try and go through as many questions as we can. Also, you'll find in the chat, and we'll link it again, a free tenancy health check link that we'll put in. So if you've got a property that's managed by yourself or another agency, and there's some things that you're not sure, you're concerned about, and you'd like myself and my team at VA to have a quick look and review that for you, we're offering a free landlord health check. Just click the link below or click the link in the chat box and you'll be able to, there's a couple of questions there to prompt you, and we'll pick that up and we will give you a call over the coming days. So please take advantage of that. We don't often do that because there's a lot of time and experience that goes into health checking a tenancy and a landlord setup. But as a thank you for joining the live, we're offering that to you this evening, and we'll do that between myself and my branch manager, who's also very experienced. So Dawn, before we move into the Q&A section, I guess one of the last questions, or one of the burning questions on everyone's mind is when? When do we think, when do we know, have they said that the Renters' Rights Bill will actually be, when will it become law? When will it become mandatory? And what are the steps that are going to happen now before it becomes mandatory? Are we expecting this in the next 2-3 weeks? Are we expecting this in the next 2-3 years? What do you think from your experience and from what you've seen?
Well, certainly neither of those. So be thankful it's not in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and let's be disappointed it's not in the next 2 to 3 years. So as you mentioned earlier, it went to the House of Lords yesterday and has now gone back to the House of Commons. So that's that complete now. House of Commons will now give the legislation royal assent, which basically confirms it into law. Okay, so royal assent means everybody's agreed, King stamped it, and this will become law. Now, they have said, and they have promised us, that there will be sufficient time for landlords to prepare for the legislation. Now, again, what does sufficient mean? Does it mean 1 month? Does it mean 3 months? Does it mean 6 months? My gut instinct and the industry experts that I source my knowledge from, people like Property Mart, the NRLA and so forth, we're all expecting that this is going to be coming in early 2026, whereby we will have to comply. Now, normally they introduce legislation in April and October. Mm-hmm. That has been a little bit awry with the Housing Act being born in January, and then they threw not smoke alarms, EICRs in June one year. Yeah. So it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, if it was January, I don't think that gives us enough time, including the Christmas period, to prepare. So I'm anticipating probably April is what I'm thinking. But what I would say is that there is so much that needs to change. It's not just about knowing the laws. The moment it becomes law, we are going to have to do certain things, serve certain documentation, change the way that we've done things, have new letters, new notices. The whole thing is going to change. So what I'm saying to landlords at the moment is, landlords, if you are a self-managing landlord, now is the time to ask yourself that question. If you were a 1 or a 2 on this list, now's the time to hand this over to the experts, because my biggest concern in renters reform is not, renters' rights, is not what the legislation entails, but the penalties that can be applied to landlords or agents that are non-compliant. That's my concern. So I'm saying to landlords, rent guarantee is no longer optional. In my opinion, it's essential. Mm-hmm. And number 2, if you are not a full-time landlord that fully understands the law, has listened to this as much as I have over the last 5 years and are ready to go, give it to somebody that can, because the penalties are just too great.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Dawn. Really appreciate that. And that brings us actually really nice and tidy to the end of the formal conversation between myself and you. And now I'd like to look at, because I believe we've got some questions in the chat, and I really want to have an opportunity for us to answer as many questions as possible. So I'll just pick them out one by one at random.
Let's go.
So we have a question here that says, if one sells the property and the tenant has been 2 years or more, does the 4 months notice still apply? So if one sells the property and the tenant has been in there for 2 years or more, will the 4 months notice still apply?
Yeah, so if the tenant has been in there for 2 years, let's say tenant has been in there for 2 years and you wish to sell the property, you would serve a notice giving 4 months. So the 4-month period will always be applicable. Okay. The only difference with the period is in that first 12 months, you cannot gain possession of your property for the purpose of selling.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And here's the question that I think a lot of people will be wondering. So if you currently have a fixed term contract in place, and when the bill passes and becomes law, does that mean that that fixed term will be allowed to play itself out? Or what do we think will happen? Will it nullify it immediately?
So we need to keep an eye on what's going to happen. But as it stands, the communication that they are providing us is that it will be retrospective. And what that therefore means is that every tenancy in the private rented sector will convert to the Renters' Rights Bill. Now, normally what they do with legislation, for example, when they brought the tenant fee ban in, any existing tenancies, the tenant fee ban was not applicable for 12 months. It gave you a year to get through. This legislation, they are saying, is going to be retrospective. So the moment that it comes into force, not when it gets royal assent, let's just be clear. Royal assent means, yes, they all agree and it will become law. If the implementation date is the 1st of April, from the 1st of April, every tenancy will become periodic. The new rules will apply. There is very likely something that will need to be issued to your tenants. Now, again, I look to the other nations of Great Britain, and Wales was an example. They changed to the Renting Homes Act of 2016 some years ago, in 2020 actually. They had to issue their tenants with what was called a written statement. So there is going to be requirements that we as agents, landlords, are going to have to do to comply. One of the things I would say, though, is if you have served a Section 21 notice and it is in its journey, they are saying that there will be a protected time for those to go through.
Okay.
We don't know what that time is. We don't know the timings. But if you are in the process, as in you've already served it before the bill come out, then you should be able to still proceed with that notice.
Now that brings me on to a thought that just came into my mind actually, which was so if at the moment as a landlord I have a tenancy that's a little bit shaky, I'm not too keen on how this tenant and this tenancy has been going. Should I now take action? Should I issue the Section 21 now? Should I double my rent now? Because obviously landlords are going to be looking at their tenants, and this is the time for us as landlords to be looking at our tenancies. And I think, Dawn, we're maybe currently and in the past as landlords, we've let certain little things go. And sometimes those little things that tenants and tenancies do, they correct themselves and it's fine. But sometimes they are telltale signs as to what might get bigger and come in and arise in those tenancies in the future. So maybe as landlords, if there's any type of things that has happened or are happening within our tenancies now, is now the time to start reviewing and thinking, what should we do with this tenant and tenancy?
It is, absolutely. But what I would say is landlords, don't panic and go and evict all your tenants because it's the only opportunity that you've got. Because although this is a big legislative change and although it is going to bring challenges our way, the private rented sector is still a great place to be. Let's not forget that property is a natural gaining equity capital gain property investment. So that's not going to change. But yes, Vanessa, if you've got a tenant that maybe always late with the rent, for example, or, you know,
Yes.
has been too far behind with the rent, or is not quite doing what you're supposed to be. I was talking to one of my agents today, and she said to me, we've moved a tenant in about 6 weeks ago. Tenant has now got 3 unpermitted dogs in a 2-bed flat. Get that tenant out now while we can still use it. Of course, she's restricted for the first 4 months. She can't serve Section 21 anyway, but
Yeah.
you want to do that if you have problems that you think, I don't want to take this into the new world.
I totally agree, and I think, and that brings me to just remind everyone about the free landlord health check that we've put out this evening. So if you've got any type of tenancy concerns or questions about current tenancies that you have, if you drop that in if you fill out the link, we will for free review your tenancies for you, which also links to the last question that I can see. If there are any other questions, we only have a couple of minutes left to go through questions, so please drop it in the chat. But there is a question here that says, so does VA Property Services offer an eviction service for self-managed properties? Okay, and that question, I believe, is coming from one of my self-managed landlords. And honestly, the answer to that question is yes, we do. In the last couple of years, we launched a service that we actually call VA Landlord Rescue, and that was born out of a lot of self-managed landlords that would come to us saying, this has happened, I've got this property, this problem, I need to get these tenants out. What do I do about this? What do I do about that? So together with my branch manager, we launched VA Landlord Rescue, which is a service that's out there for self-managed landlords, particularly who end up in a predicament that they can't handle or don't know how to deal with. So yes, we can. It's always subject to the actual issue that's presented to us. So we will look at it and we will see whether it's something that we feel that we can do and do successfully for you. So we will go through on a one-to-one that doesn't cost anything, what the issues that you're experiencing are, what sort of tenancy paperwork do you have, and then we will then advise you based on our knowledge and experience what we can render as a service to help you through that situation. Sometimes it may just be mediation. It's not always necessarily eviction. Other times it may well be for court application and eviction. So we do offer a VA landlord rescue service that helps self-managed landlords out of certain situations. But I think ultimately, if you're managed, you'd be one step ahead with whatever agent you choose. Of course, I would advocate for VA if you're in Luton, but if you're managed with a good agency who's on top of the tenancy, who's on top of legislation, hopefully you shouldn't get too near those breaking points in the first instance. So, landlords, we are here to help and support you whichever which way. I don't see any other, sorry, Dawn.
I just wanted to finalise something on that point there, Vanessa, because I don't think self-managed landlords actually realise the amount of things that have passed probably your desk and mine, whereby the scenario has happened that, look, we need some help now. This tenant has become a problem. But the fact that they're self-managing and certain things have not been done in the way that they should be throughout the duration of the tenancy, that really hinders a landlord's ability to either, one, gain possession, or two, recover any of the rent, for example, if they're a non-paying tenant, because of counterclaims. And in my 23 years, I have seen 3 successful counterclaims from tenants on rent arrears grounds, whereby the rent arrears the claim has been unsuccessful because actually on the counterclaim, the landlord now owes the tenant. So it is really important that landlords maintain compliance at the start and throughout the tenancy journey.
Absolutely, because there are some things that are really difficult to remedy and cost a lot of time. And as we know, time in the landlord space is money. So totally agree. We don't have any other new questions in the chat box. So I think in order to wrap up, Dawn, I mean, how would you summarize where we are right now and where we're going with the Renters' Rights Bill? Because like you said earlier, the landlord space is still a great space to be. In general, most tenancies are good. Not perfect, but most tenancies are good. So it's still a great market to be. It's still a absolutely amazing place to put your investment. So how would you summarize kind of where we're heading as landlords, given what's ahead of us in the next probably 6 months?
I think what I would say is that you are investing in bricks and mortar, which has always been a great investment, and in theory should always gain profit over the course of the coming years. A couple of things that I would just say in the new world is protect yourself. take out rent guarantee, make sure that you're covered. What I call it is mitigating your loss. It's reducing that risk. Make sure that you're doing everything that you can to reduce that risk. You can do so quite cost effectively. I mean, my agency that I work for in Wolverhampton, our rent guarantee comes at a cost of £30 per month. If that can guarantee you 15, 18 grand in rent, wow,
Yeah.
what you know, don't be fearful. There's still a lot of investors coming into the market and buying properties, and they're the ones that are going to lap up the landlords that are running and selling for the hills. So for me, it's just another change in the private rented sector that we will navigate, and we will come out successful the other end. Remember, guys, houses are always needed and always will be. So the private rented sector plays a key part in England's housing.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Dawn.
You're
Thank you for
welcome.
bringing your compliance expertise and your knowledge to the platform this evening. I'm sure it's been of great help and benefit to the landlords that have joined. What we will do, I think Reese dropped in the chat box a poll. If you can find the poll there, which has basically given us an indication as to how informative and helpful you feel tonight has been. It'd be great if you could just vote on the poll. I can't see the poll, but I believe it's in the chat box. If you can have a look and just vote and let us know if you felt tonight was really useful, it gave you information, it's got you running scared, or it's hopefully made you feel a little bit more informed. That will give you more confidence as we step forth into 2026 and these changes will be coming about. It's been a pleasure for me to host this evening. Looking forward to coming back next year with more lives where we'll be bringing more relevant topics to landlords, whether that's legislation, whether that's things to help you along your landlord journey. We're committed to always bringing you fresh information, new information to keep you and your landlord business safe and ultimately growing and profitable. So thank you, and I wish you a good evening and a pleasant rest of the week. Good night.